Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This is session 2AY of the DB2 stream, and we have Christoph Thiessen, Senior Solutions Advisor for Rocket Software. His presentation will be on DB2 Clients, Connect Gateways, What Do I Really Need? This is session 2AY. Please don't forget the feedback at the end, and don't forget to donate as generously as you can afford to the GSC sponsored charities this year. Thank you, Christoph. Over to you.
Thank you, Marcus, and good morning to everyone. My name is Christoph Thiessen. I joined Rocket Software earlier this year after decades of working for IBM. So this presentation is actually one of my, let's say, IBM heritage. So that's the reason why it's here in the agenda. And I just want to, before starting, I want to repeat this, or show this slide again to remind you to the charity raffle and invite you to donate the same way as Marcus did. And then we will start with the presentation. DB2 Clients Connect Gateways. There's often some confusion out there in the DB2 community. It's still out there because there's no, let's say, common meaning. What does DB2 Connect mean? What is it? What's behind this name or this term? And I want to do a little bit of clarification and make it clearer for you what these terms mean. So we will first uncover what is DB2 Connect to be as precise as possible. Then we move over to the concept of data server clients and data server drivers, because it's also part of this game here. Then we still have the discussion, or we'll discuss the topic of the DB2 Connect server, or also known gateway. For some of you or your customers, that might still be might still apply, or might still be a discussion point. And if you're still using DB2 Connect server and you're intending a migration to direct connectivity, I have compiled some slides what needs to be considered when you want to migrate. But first of all, let's try to go back to the basics. What is DB2 Connect? And if you will ask what is DB2 Connect, most of you would probably say, okay, that is the piece of software that connects clients to DB2 servers. That is almost right. To be more precise, it's let's say a software solution from IBM. And that's just a beginning. Let's make this clear. It's IBM software solution. So you also have other options out there in the market if you want to connect your clients to DB2 for ZOS or DB2 for iSeries. So we will talk about the IBM approach, which I think covers most of the market, but still make sure that it's if you have other types of connectivity from other vendors, then of course, other licensing models and technology may apply here. So within DB2 Connect, we see often out there in the market that customers or users see this as a synonym for DB2 clients. This is not exactly the truth. So what's behind this concept of DB2 Connect? First of all, you need a license that costs money. So as soon as you want to connect a DB2 data server client or a driver or a DB2 LUW to a DB2 for ZOS, as well as a DB2 for iSeries, then IBM asks for a DB2 Connect license. And there's different options how you can, for licensing, or how you can install this license, but basically installing DB2 Connect means also installing or activating a license. Secondly, you need some piece of software from a technical standpoint that allows you to talk to a DB2 for ZOS server. And the IBM solution, which goes along with DB2 Connect, is the data server client or the data server driver. There's a little bit of confusion sometimes which flavors of this software is might be used for special purposes and what is out there in the market, because you can download this one, the data server client, so data server driver, for free. The only thing you need is an IBM ID, and that costs nothing. You do not need any, let's say, Passport Advantage constructs or access to Passport Advantage to download that. So be aware, we need a license along with a piece of software which is named client or driver, which allows you to connect to a DB2 for ZOS server. And the third component in this picture, which is the DB2 Connect server, is optional. You are not forced to use a DB2 Connect server. This is optional depending on your needs. And as we will see, IBM is asking users to move away from this DB2 Connect server and use direct connectivity from clients to DB2 for ZOS. So always a subject for, let's say, confusion and frustration is the licensing options which exist for DB2 Connect. And whenever we talk about licenses, we have to be careful because IBM changed that quite often in the past, the licensing options and the metrics behind the licenses. So everything we can show here is the current status as it is of DB2 Connect version 11.5. So if you are not sure whether you are correctly licensed or over or under licensed, we also see out there in the field that clients or customers have more license have more licenses than they actually need. Then check back with IBM, with the IBM sales rep or the software partner, IBM partner, to make sure that you're correctly licensed. And there's in general, there are 3 types of license which are available for DB2 Connect. The first one is the, let's say, simplest, is the Enterprise Edition. This always for a, let's say, medium size installation, because this Enterprise Edition maps to, let's say, named users or a group of named users. This is 2 subcategories. One is the authorized user, as the name implies. You dedicate a license to a user or a workstation. And the second one is a floating user install or FUSI. This one is for groups of users where a licensing server, to be more precise, a DB2 Connect server, manages the licenses for the end users. The second flavor is the Application Server Edition. As the name implies, this is mainly aimed for installation where we have an unknown user, number of end users, because they use, let's say, a web application. And this application server there behind is running the DB2 client application and connecting to the mainframe. And the Application Server Edition is basically the price goes along with the, let's say, capacity of the application server and does not depend on the number of end users. And the, let's say, simple and very easy to manage, or quite easy to manage solution, but of course, it's in most cases is the most expensive one, is the Unlimited Edition. As the name shows, you do not need to differentiate between application servers, end users, named users. It gives you the full-blown access to DB2 Connect, which means every user can connect to the mainframe, regardless whether it's from an end user workstation or an application server. There's 2 for this application server and Unlimited Edition. There's 2 so-called Advanced Edition. The Advanced Editions are actually, from a technical standpoint, there's no difference to the other edition. The only thing what you get as of today that might change in the future is that you get additional components or access to additional technology components, which is named Optim Pure Query and the DB2 Configuration Manager in case of the Unlimited Advanced Edition, which you wouldn't get if you didn't have the Advanced Edition. But as I said, check back with IBM. These conditions often change. They did change often in the past, and it's always a good idea if you think over your infrastructure to check back with IBM in this case. So the DB2 Connect license. I just repeat this, and I will repeat this later on. It is required if you connect from your data server client or your data server driver. We will see what it is in more detail, or a DB2 Connect server to DB2 for ZOS. No matter what flavor you install, whether it's a fat client or a thin client, it is still required. It is also required, and that changed in the past because I think it was somehow at some time it was included in the LUW license, depending on the LUW edition. If you're running an application, for example, on an LUW server or machine which hosts the LUW server, you also need a DB2 Connect license when this application connects to DB2 for ZOS. On the other hand, if you have your mainframe DB2s connected to each other, if one DB2 on the mainframe connects to each other via the DDF, via the communications database, for example, then there's no DB2 Connect license. And also, and this is perhaps a good news, if you have a look at the DB2 for ZOS via native REST services, which are available, I think, since 2017, then there's no DB2 Connect license required because we don't go through the DB2 client or driver, data server driver stack in this case. Maybe some of you have also worked with IBM Data Studio or other products which have connections to or enable connections to the mainframe in the background. And perhaps you didn't install a DB2 Connect license if you installed IBM Data Studio in the past. So the reason why this still works is because that these products come along with a restricted license. So there is some license in the installation path, in the class path, for example, for Data Studio. But of course, you cannot take this one and use it for other purposes than just for Data Studio, which means we have products with restricted licenses. It's not only Data Studio, I think Data Stage, a similar approach, and other products as well. So now let's move to the concept of data server clients and data server drivers. In general, clients and drivers is that piece of software that enables your application, be it JDBC or CLI or .NET or ODBC, whatever runs on a distributed client, to enable that application to talk to DB2 for ZOS. But it's actually not only ZOS. As soon as you have such a piece of software, then you can also would also use clients and drivers to talk to a non-ZOS DB2, to a DB2 LUW. So clients and drivers are not specific to mainframe connectivity. They enable connectivity to every, let's say, DB2 database, be it on the mainframe, on iSeries, or be it, of course, in the LUW ecosystem. From the mainframe perspective, there's no differentiation between data sharing or non-data sharing. So you could configure your clients to directly to a DB2 for ZOS data sharing member. You could configure it to a dynamic Viper so that it can work with all members of your data sharing group. And you could also use a Db2 Connect server right in the middle between the clients and your mainframe, or you could use direct connectivity. That makes no differentiation from the clients and driver perspective. In every case, we will have a DIDA connectivity, which is for Java, always type 4, JDBC type 4, and for non-Java, some kind of type 4-like connectivity. So if you go to the IBM download site or go to Google and search for DB2 data server client download, you will often see that there's a complicated choice of multiple products which you could use. And so the question is, which products of this data server client and driver fits best for my purpose? This overview picture should show what's available here and how these different clients and drivers relate to each other. If you start from with the green box, the data server client, this is the FAT client, the traditional DB2 client, which has a installation procedure which is quite similar to DB2 LUW server. So it's quite huge installation. You can install it with a response file. You can deploy it to several workstations, and everything we get is, of course, the full function client, and also a bunch of tools which comes along, which means you have, for example, you have a C++ precompiler, SQL precompiler. You could compile and bind embedded SQL applications. The question is whether when you would need this. Typically, this is a developer workstation or developer workplace where that would be required, and not necessarily an application server. Then there's a little bit smaller type of client, which is the data server runtime client. And as the name implies, it's mainly used if you do not want to develop embedded SQL applications on this workstation or on this PC, but you want to have some additional tooling compared to the smaller packages, for example, which you would use to run SQL scripts to administer remote LUW databases as well. So you could install a runtime client on a workstation, use this runtime client to connect to different other DB2s, be it LUW or the mainframe, and you could run the entire variety of SQL syntax or command syntax which you against the DB2 LUW database instances. So this is more, let's say, administrator-like type of client which you would get, which you would use if you installed the data server runtime client. And the next one, far smaller one, is the data server driver package, and this is aimed for let's say runtime, mainly for runtime environments. So, and if you have not the need to do a lot of administration for the DB2 databases. For example, you could you have with the data server driver package all the required drivers, be it Java or be it non-Java, be it Python, Perl, whatever you need, .NET, ODBC, everything which is required to run a program, run an application. And you would get some, let's say, additional tooling, which is helpful if you want to, let's say, catalog or configure your database connections. To be more precise, you do not have the catalog command within data server driver package, but you would have a similar command, which is named DB2 CLI or CLP+, which is another command tool, which would help you to catalog your database connections to the remote databases. Then we have two quite small packages, and we'll start with this one in the right lower corner, which is the data server driver for JDBC and SQLJ. That's actually everything you need to run a JDBC application. So if you're hosting an application server, and this application server should run an be it WebSphere, Tomcat, JBoss, whatever, and should it connect to DB2 on the mainframe or on LUW, this is everything you need to run the application from the DB2 connectivity perspective. It is the data server driver for JDBC and SQLJ. And this is very, very small in the footprint and in the installation effort compared to the other types of clients or drivers. And the second one in this small box here is the data server driver for ODBC. And it's, I would say, the sister or brother of the data server driver for JDBC and SQLJ. You could use this small installation or this small package to distribute it to your ODBC infrastructure, to your Excel clients, to your Windows world, to the Windows world, everywhere is just needed to run ODBC connectivity and nothing else. In this slide, I've compared once more the capabilities of the clients. As you remember, we have two types of clients. Every client has some certain installation size, which is about 500 to 600 megabytes. That's that is quite a huge number for an installation on a workstation. The runtime client is, as I mentioned, more for the runtime, for hosting your DB2 applications, and the data server client is also for application developers. Of course, they can develop Java applications. They could also develop C++ or COBOL applications if you want to. Everything where a traditional precompile is needed. In both cases, you will get a DB2 catalog, so very similar to a DB2 LUW server instance. You will have command line tools, of course, the CLP that DB2 LUW administrators are used to, and the much smaller DB2 CLI tool. See this comparison to the data server drivers, and you'll see the installation images are far, far smaller than for the data server clients. The data server driver package has about 75 megabytes on a Linux system, and it is mainly used to run DB2 applications of different flavors, be it Java, be it CLI.NET or ODBC, whatever. Everything would work with the data server driver package. You don't have a DB2 catalog with neither of these three types of data server drivers. The only thing you get is for the data server driver package, and the ODBC driver is the opportunity to configure your connections in flat files, the db2 cli.ini or the db2 driver.config. And you don't have the CLP tool, which you are used to if you come from the DB2 LUW administration. The only thing you get is CLP Plus or DB2 CLI. So once more, a summary. If you run your JDBC applications and you also want to develop, that's no differentiation. It's sufficient to have the data server driver for JDBC and SQLJ. For embedded SQL applications or running applications, the data server driver package should be okay in most cases. And if you want to develop applications with the requirement for pre-compilation, then you are required to have the data server client. For end users, which means Excel, Access, whatever you need for ODBC access, the data server driver package is sufficient, or you could also use the data server driver for ODBC. And as soon as you want to run CLP scripts, or want to administer DB2 LUW from your client, then you're advised to install the fatter one, the DB server client or the data server runtime client. The data server driver package should fit, for most situations. It is recommended to use this one if you are not so happy with this huge installation package that you get with the data server clients. So it is a good type of compromise between the fatter and the bigger, the smaller types of clients and drivers. And you could use the DB2 CLI command line tool to populate and check your configuration files. Whenever you have the LUW installation or a DB2 server instance, then that embeds a data server client functionality. So there's no need on this machine to install additional client or client components. And this also applies to a DB2 Connect server, because a DB2 Connect server is some kind of a DB2 LUW server, with the difference that you cannot, let's say, host any local databases on a DB2 Connect gateway. And always repeating here once more, you always need a DB2 Connect license, regardless of the type of client product you choose. So let's move on to the DB2 Connect server, or also known as the DB2 Connect gateway in the past. A typical installation, as we find it out there in the market or in the customer environments, is a DB2 Connect server, which means you have let's say, a man in the middle or an installation in the middle, named the DB2 Connect server, that accepts connections from the actual DB2 applications, be it on workstations, be it on application servers, and routes these connections or maps these connections towards DB2 for ZOS. So it's a kind of, as the name implies, as a kind of gateway for all this, which is here shown on the left-hand side. In addition, you would install the DB2 Connect license in this central place at the DB2 Connect server, so that there would be no need to install the DB2 Connect license on every workstation or application server here on the left-hand side, which is connecting to the gateway or to the Connect server. You could also run local client applications directly on the DB2 Connect server. And this is when this installation or this type of infrastructure has been very, very common in the past. Many customers started their, let's say, journey with distributed connections into DB2 for ZOS this way, with a DB2 Connect gateway or server in the middle. And what was their motivation? There's mainly, I think, 3 points why customers did that in the past. First one is, of course, the point of control. So if I have this one in the middle, I have a little bit more of a control instance. So if for whatever reason something is going wrong on the left-hand side of this DB2 Connect server in the client infrastructure, I could simply shut down the DB2 Connect server and would, let's say, cut the connections from any misbehaving application on the left-hand side into my mainframe. The second one is the reduction of connections into the mainframe. You might remember that there was some kind of limitations in the past regarding the number of remote connections into DB2 for ZOS. This was also related to storage limitations, and so it was a common pattern to use the DB2 Connect server for some kind of connection concentration. The third one, which came along with the data sharing, was that the Db2 Connect server was also capable to distribute the workload across the data sharing group, and so that the Db2 drivers on the left side didn't need to care about anything of workload distribution. This was done in the, let's say, between the Db2 Connect servers and the Db2s on the mainframe. So if we see these arguments, let's check, are these still valid nowadays? So the first one is the Db2 Connect server helps me in isolation and grouping, isolating, and if needed, throttling down clients to my mainframe. Yes, that was a valid argument in the past, but nowadays we have alternatives. You could use, for example, Db2 or the most common alternative would be Db2 as profile tables, which means you have the option to group your clients in profile tables and then do some, let's say, have some turning knobs within the profile tables to control the number of connections, the number of threads. You could also, which is also an advantage of profile tables, define special register settings for these clients which come into Db2 as via a certain type of profile. And with, I think it started with Db2 12, you could we added wildcard support, or IBM added wildcard support, so that you can also easily manage groups of clients with IP address wildcarding in profile tables. So from that point of view, yes, we have an alternative to control these clients which are currently running behind the Db2 Connect server gateway with means provided by Db2 itself. The second one, connection concentration. I will show you that in a minute, how this works in Db2 Connect server. We use connection concentration in order to reduce the number of DBATs, database access threads, in Db2 and we want to save ZOS main storage. This too was an accepted argument in the past. Meanwhile, we have some, let's say, improvements on the Db2 side or on the mainframe side. For example, we have nearly all components which exploit the 64-bit addressing on the mainframe side, and especially since Db2 we have now the option to have several thousand threads theoretically into Db2. And of course, real storage isn't that expensive as it used to be in the past. It's still quite expensive compared to other platforms, okay? But the argument that we have to be, let's say, to look for every byte of storage, that is not valid anymore from my point of view. And the last one here, connection pooling, which was one of the strengths, or is one of the strengths of the Db2 Connect server, is now used in application servers as well, and probably better than in Db2 Connect server. And also Db2 itself has concepts of connection pooling. Lastly, the third argument for Db2 Connect server, from a data sharing perspective, we use Db2 Connect server for workload balancing and failover. That's also fair, that's also valid for the past. Meanwhile, we have some improvements here on the data server, driver, and client side. And as you see, there was some major improvement with version 9.5, and I think it's more than 10 years ago when IBM introduced this, which allows clients and drivers, both of them, to configure sysplex workload balancing directly for a Java or JDBC, a Java or non-Java application. So everything which is required to, let's say, interact with the Sysplex distributor to check which is the best member to connect to in a data sharing environment. This is handled by the data server driver itself. So there's no need to have DB2 Connect server in the middle for just that reason. And there's also the concept of automatic client reroute, which means that whenever one member fails, another member is taken. This is automatically activated as soon as the Sysplex workload balancing is set on in the data server driver configuration for a connection. But there is still, and that's the reason perhaps why DB2 Connect server is still used and it is still supported by IBM, some very specific constellations where DB2 Connect server is still required. That is also true. As I mentioned at the beginning, there were a couple of licensing models, and one of these models was is the Enterprise Edition with floating user single install, also named FUSI. And this option requires that there's one instance of control that looks how many connections are active, and that checks this number of connections against the number of installed licenses or the number of users for which licenses are installed. And this is currently done by DB2 Connect server. So yes, if you have this license, you still need DB2 Connect server to control the number of users. There's also a specific situation where you might need Connect server if you are in a if you're running XA transactions, global transactions, and you're required to run it within a beta sharing group, that might require you to still have Connect server, because Connect server will ensure that every XA transaction which is started from a remote instance is run on just one member in the data sharing group and will not distribute to other members. And if you are using Federation server and you need Federation to DB2 for 0 as databases or data sources, then DB2 Connect server is also required. Nevertheless, for most of the customers, direct connections should be the way to go. And one thing, or I just want to show you the advantages which we will have with direct connections. The first one is performance. So of course, if you have a direct connection and you don't have the DB2 Connect server in the middle, then less network hops are required. And it's also easier from an administration perspective to have fewer servers in this entire topology. And you also have this very special piece of software, which is, let's say, LUW server, which is not really an LUW server, if you can get rid of that. You would also have the, you can eliminate a potential point of failure. Of course, the DB2 Connect server can fail. You need a backup or let's say a failover concept. So if you can get rid of that, that's also an added advantage. And this automatic client reroute capability that I mentioned earlier is available in DB2 Connect server and also in the DB2 clients and drivers, but it only works at transaction boundary in the DB2 clients and drivers. If you want to have in a DB2 Connect server, it only works on connection at a connection boundary. So there's a smaller, let's say, granularity, there's a fine granularity for automatic clients we wrote here in with DB2 clients and drivers. I've seen that there's one entry in the chat window, and if you allow, we will discuss that after the presentation. So let's continue with the advantages of direct connections. So perhaps you are also leveraging or trying to work with DB2 trusted context and roles. And this is also one thing which doesn't work with DB2 Connect server. So if you working, DB2 Connect server does not propagate the end user's client IP addresses to DB240S. So this might be a problem if you want to leverage a trusted context. The second one is encryption, which is very, let's say, trending in the DB240S world, I would say. If you are required to encrypt your end-to-end connection from the DB2 client, from the application to DB240S, then you will have a complete solution with the direct connectivity only. For DB2 Connect server, you would have two connections. One connection from the client or from the application via the client to DB2 Connect server, and then a second one from the Connect server to DB240S. That might be okay if your, let's say, if your security people are happy with that, but a more complete solution, end-to-end solution, can only be achieved with the direct connectivity. And lastly, DB2 Connect server is what IBM names stabilized, which is another expression I would say for no more improvements or further developments will go into DB2 Connect server. It is still supported, so no fear that you will run out of support, but we expect new capabilities only be seen in the DB2 data server drivers or clients world. So the last section, when we still have the DB2 Connect server and we want to migrate, what is to be considered in this migration process? First of all, of course, you need to change your network configuration or your client configuration. There's mainly three options. The first one would be go to your clients, go into be it the DB2 catalog on the client side or the db2ds driver.config, the configuration files, and create new entries for the direct connectivity to DB240S, or change the existing data source entries. The second one could be to leave the client configuration unchanged and replace DB2 Connect server with a router. That might be some kind of interim solution. Or you could define another Viper and location alias on the ZOS side, and this Viper and location alias would reflect the IP address and port which is currently used for the DB2 Connect server. And then at some point you would remove the DB2 Connect server and activate the Viper and the location alias on the ZOS side so that your DB2 clients can connect directly. See this example here for a location alias. On the upper half, you have this traditional configuration where the DB2 driver connects to the DB2 Connect server and then is mapped to the mainframe. And on the second half, on the lower half of this picture, you would take exactly this IP address of the DB2 Connect server. It's 10.7.1.10 in this example with port 50,000, and assign this to a DViper and as well as to a dynamic location alias on the mainframe side. Second topic would be DDF configurations. And if you use DB2 Connect server to do some kind of connection concentration, which I guess most of the users of DB2 Connect servers do or did, then you would have to check in your DDF configuration or your DSNZ palms whether you need some adjustments here. And I've listed here some ZPalms which are interesting or should be considered. First one, of course, max debug, the maximum number of active debugs into DB2. This is perhaps needs some adjustments. You could allow up to nearly 20,000 into DB2. The default is 200. So if you use the default in the past because you were sure that everything is, let's say, throttled down or concentrated by your DB2 Connect gateways, make sure that you have a higher number now. A con debug controls the inbound DDF connections that could be much higher than the number of actual active debugs. The third one is maximum number of threads overall, be it from a local applications or be it from distributed. Then you need to consider additional ZPalms for CMT stud, for example, for thread pooling. Typically, this is on the setting of inactive. Then you have three ZPalms, which would require you to configure the maximum number of connections that you can queue in DDF, and the maximum time a connection could wait to get an active debug. Typically, these are not so often touched by administrators. And then, of course, you can always have a look at the maximum idle time for an active set, which is listed here as the last one in this picture. So just for your visualization, if you have in the traditional DB2 Connect server world, there's been two settings: max connections, which means how many clients could connect into my DB2 Connect server, and max coord agents, which means how many outbound connections could I have or could I allow into DB2 for ZOS. And as soon as the max connections is higher than the max coord agents, then it means that the connection concentrator is on. And then you should consider to have this number, max connections, also be reflected at least in the con debug ZPalms on the ZOS side. With DB2 for ZOS profile tables, you can also control this number of connections on a client level. So we have here an example. This is an example for an app server which has an IP address and a group of clients. Currently these the app server and the clients have a connection via DB2 Connect server and have coord agents, max coord agents equals 10, which means they have 10. DB2 Connect server would allow 10 connections into DDF, into DB2. So with profile tables, we could achieve the same. You need to define, first of all, a profile, which is shown here, which is an entry in this IBM.dsn profile table. And then you have to assign attributes to this profile. And this attribute, which consists of a keyword and the attributes itself. And a keyword here for this profile, which wants to limit the number of connections to 10, would mean monitor threads in the keywords column of DSN profile attributes, and we would allow only 10 and would express this with attribute 1 equals exception and attribute 2 equals this number 10. So with this configuration and attribute and profile tables profile started, we would only allow 10 connections from all these app servers and clients which fit into this profile, which means everything which is, for example, with this IP address 10.1.2 point something. So if you're not happy with that and you want to say, okay, I would prefer to give more resources to the app server and limit the connections to the rest of this group, then you could create two profiles. So in this example, we would have a dedicated profile for the app server, which is 10.1.2.3. And this dedicated profile would still use 10, would be allowed to have 10 connections into DB2. But the rest of the group, for the PC clients, for example, which are in the same range of the IP addresses, would only allow 4 connections. So you could, if you played around with the IP addresses, you could tune very well which resources or which number of connections is allowed for which group of clients or application servers. And this is not the only type of attributes which is allowed in profile tables. As I mentioned, you could define special registers, global variables. You could say application compatibility, for example, for this type of clients equals 501 or equals 100, depending on what you want to achieve or what your types of clients or groups of clients you are working with. So one of the last considerations is the DB2 Connect license. I mentioned earlier, licensing is important because it's always a reason for trouble and frustration. And at some point in the picture, the DB2 Connect license needs to be placed. And in the past, it was quite easy because we could use the DB2 Connect server, store it in this centralized place, and every client which connected to this through the DB2 Connect server to the backend, to the mainframe, would be licensed or participate of this license. The concept of unlimited editions or unlimited advanced edition makes it quite easy to manage the DB2 Connect license, because there's an option to activate this license centrally on the DB2 4ZOS side. So if you are entitled for an unlimited edition, you could install this license centrally on your DB2 data servers or data sharing groups. And every type of client which connects to this DDF, to this DB2, would be licensed. If you don't have the unlimited edition, then of course some additional work is waiting for you, because then you have to deploy this license activation kit to every type of client, to every application server, which is here now connecting directly to DB2, which means you have the FAT clients, which use the DB2 LIC-M utility. For the non-FAT clients, which means the data server drivers, you could use the license file, which is shipped with DB2 Connect license, and need to place it on the right place in the file system. And especially for Java, you would certainly know that there is a jar file which is delivered with the for the Java applications with the DB2 Connect license. This needs to be placed into the class path of your Java application. But this is actually common work for administrators of application servers to handle jar files and class paths. So, conclusion. At the end, I want to emphasize once more that the licensing is essential. I'm a technical person and not from a sales organization, but I want to make sure, understand what is the best licensing option for you. And if you're not sure, step back, have a look at your installation, have a look at your licensing with your licensing department, and check back with IBM if you're not sure whether you are correctly licensed or you might also be over licensed. We have seen this also in the past, that you paid perhaps too much for your licenses or more than you actually should pay. It is important if you want to move to a Db2 direct connectivity, you're encouraged to do so, then that you do the right migration steps. It is also you're also advised to make you familiar with the concepts of data server clients or drivers, what deployment options exist. Do I really need these fatter Db2 data server clients, or is it also an option to go to the data server driver package, for example? And if you're still using Db2 Connect server and you are happy with your current installation and you want to avoid the additional effort for a migration, you can still, of course, work with your Db2 Connect server. That's it's still supported. I remember there were some discussions 1 or 2 years ago when IBM tried to, I would say, push their clients away from the Db2 Connect servers, but then they stepped back. Right, I think it was with function level 501, there was some discussions in this, some rumors, but currently there's no official statement that Db2 Connect server will go out of support. So if you are happy with it, be aware there might be some day when you need to migrate. And of course, every migration has will create additional work. Yeah, that's every migration, even if you are in a better place afterwards and you have, let's say, a more modern environment, yes, you need to invest into a migration project. For most cases, as far as we see out there in the market or in the technical and in the installations, a driver package would be sufficient, and also direct connectivity would work. So consider this if you are still not sure, should I migrate? And if I migrated, to what infrastructure would I migrate? So with that, I'm done. I would encourage you to submit your feedback. Session code, as Marcus said, is 2AY. And of course, I also promote GSE UK membership, though it's my very first event with the GSE UK, but of course, I always like this conference here and would also encourage you to become a member. So as far as I've seen, Marcus, there's one question in the chat or one remark.
It was just me inviting
Okay.
people to ask questions, and it seems that we don't have any questions because it probably means that your presentation was comprehensive and understandable. So thank you very much, Christoph, for a very interesting and useful presentation. And we will speak to you all soon in the next session. So once again, thank you, Christoph.
Okay, thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.